Mhm. This panel is specifically about interviewing for industry. We have 4 panelists, which I'll introduce now, and then I will take care of changing our settings. All right, so first up, we have Dr. Rory Cunningham. Dr. Cunningham completed his PhD in exercise physiology at the University of Missouri before pursuing a postdoc at the National Cancer Institute. At NCI, his research involved looking at mitochondrial dynamics in liver disease progression. Dr. Cunningham made the move out of academia in early 2022 to a biotech startup company in Manhattan, focusing, and that's Manhattan, New York, I believe, not Manhattan, Kansas, focusing on novel liver therapeutics. Joining us is also Dr. Jennifer Huberty. Dr. Huberty is an accomplished behavioral research scientist with more than 20 years experience leading academic and industry-based science, using digital approaches to change behavior and improve well-being. Dr. Huberty was the head of science at Calm and now the founder of Fit Minded LLC, in which she serves as a fractional chief science officer and an advisory board member, contributing to the scientific thought leadership and vision for the digital health companies. Dr. Huberty also served as a mentor for the Headstream and Techstars, in which she assists startup companies as they navigate ways in which to integrate and leverage science for their company while saving on resources. She has experience conducting research in a number of settings. She's published over 160 papers and has a current appointment as an associate professor at the Mays Cancer Center, MD Anderson in San Antonio, Texas, where she holds an R01 and a R21. Dr. Huberty spent more than 18 years as a research faculty, 9 of those as an associate professor at Arizona State University in the College of Health Solutions. She holds affiliations as an associate professor and research scholar in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University of Arizona's College of Medicine and adjunct professor of medicine at Mayo Clinic College of Medicine in Scottsdale, Arizona. Dr. Huberty has a podcast titled Mindful Vibin', and she lives in Phoenix, Arizona, is married with and a mother of 2 boys, enjoys exercise, yoga, and meditation. And we have Dr. Sydney Lane. Dr. Lane has dedicated her career to women's health, doing research in maternal physiology of pregnancy, vaginal microbiome, infertility, and PCOS. She earned her PhD at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Center in integrative physiology. She then completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the fertility clinic CCRM. She joins us from Ferring Pharmaceuticals in San Diego, where she works as a scientist in early drug discovery for women's health-related diseases. And finally, on our panel, we have Folasade Phillips. She has a master's in public health and is the director of behavioral research at Lirio, where she is responsible for designing, executing, and disseminating the outcomes of Lirio's research program and advancing Lirio's credibility in the marketplace and scientific community. Prior to joining Lirio, Folasade was a senior clinical research manager at Omada Health, where she led and managed clinical trials and observational studies of digital behavior change programs. She earned her master's in public health from the University of California, Berkeley, and her bachelor's in sociology from Xavier University of Louisiana. With that, I will stop sharing. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. What I'd like to ask you to do, first of all, is to just introduce yourselves, and you can talk a little bit more about your position and your role, maybe what that looks like day to day. And then we'll dive into discussing any information you want to share about interviewing for industry. Dr. Cunningham, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So I'm Rory. I'm a preclinical scientist at Ochre Bio, a liver therapeutics biotech startup in, yes, correct, Manhattan, New York. I should have specified. I didn't know there was Manhattan in Kansas, actually. So if I known, I would have made the clarification. So yeah, I joined in maybe April of 2022, after about maybe a year and a half, year and 8 months in a postdoc. Day to day. So when I joined, I kind of eventually had the idea of making not necessarily a transition, but kind of having more science communication and liaison work and patient advocacy work in my role, like moving forward. So the company were really good at being able to like incorporate that into my day-to-day role as well. So on top of the science of kind of looking at like liver physiology and kind of like a lot of like liver histology, and there's a lot of experts in the company, but not many are in like the liver field. So there's a few who are liver like physiologists, which is my background. So on top of that, it's a lot of like science communications and reaching out to we're in like the transplant space, so reaching out to people on the wait list or who have received a transplant, maybe give some talks at our company events. And we have kind of similar to what Harrison was saying in the last talk, we are also kind of spread all over the world. We have labs in Oxford and in Taiwan. So it might be an early 6 a.m. call with Oxford, and it might be, a 9 or 10 with Taiwan. So you have to be kind of flexible with that. But then, they're quite good at, take off when you can, you're not on the clock all the time. So they are quite respectful of that. And yeah, it's a very fast pace. I know it's probably cliched saying in industry it's fast paced, but it's exciting. Meet a lot of new people. It's a big team, much bigger than, if you're in quite a big lab, it is different. You really are. It is a much bigger team to be involved with. It's just good and bad sometimes. But overall, yeah, really enjoying it. Thanks for inviting me on the panel. I'm happy to share kind of anything I can about the process.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Dr. Huberty, would you like to go next?
Sure. You did a fabulous job of the intro. I don't really have a lot more to add to the background stuff, but I can just say a little bit more about what I'm doing now, which I think is most interesting to people, is due to my experience in industry over the years and as head of science at COM, I built their entire science department. I think we have like 40 publications over the years that I was there. And I was also working with Flow Health, which is a female health app for, it has like 1 million users, I would say. I'm still advising for them. But just based on all that experience and with research, I decided that I should kind of do my own thing, because I was getting so many people asking me like, how are you doing that at COM or with Flow, and can you help us do that? And so that's the Fit Minded LLC is my own company. So I'm serving as a fractional chief science officer right now. I have quite a few contracts actually, and I've only been doing this for a couple months and have a part-time clinical psychologist PhD student working for me. But basically I'm leading science strategy at these companies in line with their business priorities. So helping them really think about, okay, where do you want to be in a year from now, in 3 years from now? What markets are you selling to? And, what data do you need to tell the story to get to where you need to go? So it ranges from like going into companies and actually redoing what they've done. So some companies have scientists already, and I've had to go in and just do some mentorship with the scientists to help them shift their thinking from more of an individual research aspect to more of a, like, what if this is about the company, not about like if the company's in mental health, it's like not necessarily about the science of mental health. It's more about business priorities and the bottom line, but then also contributing to science at the same time. So helping mentoring scientists and kind of redoing what they're doing, reestablishing their designs. I hire teams for these companies to come in and do the work and then lead the work that's happening, publishing papers, doing needs assessments, reestablishing their user experiences so that they can really collect data that's going to matter in the end. So there's a number of services that I'm doing for these companies, but it's quite rewarding. And hence being on this panel today, I'm I'm interviewing so many PhDs and postdocs, it's not even funny. So I definitely know what companies are looking for, what I'm looking for, and how people have been successful or not so successful in interviews. Strong scientists that have not been successful in interviews, sadly, just because they just don't know how to interview for these positions.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're so excited to have you. It gives us the full spectrum of those that are sitting on the interview panels with our other folks that have gone through the interview process not so long ago. Folasade, would you like to go next?
Yes. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are located. My name is Sade. So I currently work at Lirio, which is a small startup headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee, and I serve as their director of behavioral research. I guess forgot to explain what Lirio is. Lirio is a startup, and we sit at the intersection of behavioral science and AI, and essentially we deliver very personalized health communication messages to help people overcome specific barriers to achieve certain health outcomes. So my role, a little bit about my day-to-day, I'm in a position started maybe end of May. So I've been in the role 7-8 months, maybe 9 months now, lost track. But essentially it's my job to give birth to our company's very new research program, really be the point person who is responsible for showing our impact, putting out proof points out there and really showing just, hey, we're out here, this is the impact of what we do, our interventions that we develop, and this is what we're doing in the marketplace to show that we're credible. A lot of my day-to-day is really just managing a few of our current RCTs that we have going on with clients who sit in the health system space, really designing, executing, and running additional studies that we're trying to do, very early foundational research to really just show some of our proof points out in the market. Really trying to figure out our publication strategy. How do we want to be strategic in terms of just the evidence we're putting out there in the marketplace or in the scientific community? I'm really a team of one right now, and I sit on our behavioral design team. So we have a team of behavioral designers who are really behind developing our specific interventions, really in the prevention space. Then I own the behavioral research. I've been in the industry space for going on 4 years now, so definitely have that experience in the interviewing space. So definitely more than happy to answer anybody's questions, specific questions around that. Super thankful to be here. I enjoy doing stuff like this because it's just great mingling and seeing other people, meeting other people in the industry space. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much. We're so happy to have you as well. Dr. Lane, would you like to share a little bit about your current position?
Yes. Hi. So I'm Sydney, and currently I am at Ferring Pharmaceuticals, which was founded in, I think, the 1950s as a women's health company, which is pretty rare. So it's one of the few companies that is really, founded based on women's health drugs, and also that continues to focus primarily on women's health drugs. We also make drugs in the GI space and urogynecology as well, as reproductive medicine and maternal health. So I came to this company about 13 months ago as a scientist one, straight out of my postdoc. I was in a postdoc for a couple of years at a fertility clinic. And so I knew that I liked women's health research, basic and translational, some clinical research, but I wanted something a bit more applied and really didn't know what I was getting myself into. But drug discovery has been really, really fun. I think, you get to do sort of what you know as a researcher, but in an applied way. And I've learned a lot over the past year. I'm still learning a lot about drug discovery, I think. And yeah, I think, my day-to-day, every day looks really different. There are days where I'm in the lab and I'm conducting, PD studies, but then there are days where, I'm researching the latest, doing a lit search on the latest, PCOS treatment modalities and kind of what off-label treatments are out there and coming up with new target ideas. And So yeah, it's really interesting, really exciting. And basically I'm situated as a reproductive medicine scientist, and then there are scientists within more of the functional areas. So there are like in vivo scientists, in vitro scientists, toxicology, all these functional groups. And then I'm kind of sitting on a group of scientists with more of like the reproductive medicine expertise. So I think it's a really amazing, opportunity for someone in my field to stay within reproductive medicine, but in a more applied way. Yeah, and I have conducted some interviews in the last year, and then it's been really interesting to hear sort of from the panel of interviewers what everyone's feedback is about different candidates and kind of what people are looking for. So I do, I think I have some interesting tidbits to share on this panel for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So just for everyone who is in the audience and on Zoom, if you have questions, please feel free to bring them up at any point. But in the absence of those, I'm going to start directing this conversation a little bit. So what I'd like to do next is to have each panelist talk a little bit about their experience in interviewing in industry. You can share any tips you might have or something that sort of stood out to you in your interviewing experience. And then perhaps we can save Dr. Huberty for last, and you can then begin to start sharing about your experience being on the interviewing panels, and everyone else that's done interviews from that side can also share their perspective at that point as well. So Dr. Cunningham, do you want to get us started here, and you can share a little bit about your interview experience? Thank you.
Yeah, so I when I was doing my postdoc, I wasn't exact. I knew I wanted to get into industry eventually at some point, and I had some idea of the area I wanted to go into. I wasn't 100% sure. I think I started off the job search and, just getting in, curating a nice resume. That was actually a bit tricky. We were all used to academic CVs. So trying to whittle that down into a resume took some time. I think I found I had a nice one, started sending it off, just looking at jobs on LinkedIn, I think at the time, or online, just kind of cold it off, no emails before, and really heard like nothing back for a long time. And then I was like, okay, I need to start maybe reaching out to people in the company, or at least finding out more about what the company did itself, or finding out about jobs. So what I found definitely was the most helpful was informational interviews with people at companies. So even, don't be like, not reaching out and looking for a job, just be like, hey, I'm interested. I came across your job title. It doesn't need to be necessarily a very senior person. Just say like, hey, I came across your job title. It looks really interesting. I wonder if you had, a couple of minutes, 15, 20 minutes of your day for a quick phone call or Zoom or whatever, just to chat about it. And you'll find out so much about if you're interested in the job title. There's only so much, a blurb on LinkedIn or online can do. You'll find so much more about the job. It's much more intricate. You'll really find out a lot about the day-to-day, and not just the job itself, but what the company is like, where they're headed, and kind of dynamics within the company. And so that was incredible, just learning about the job itself. But then you have an in with that person, and then they might be like, hey, yeah, you should reach out to this hiring manager. And then you can say, hey, I met so-and-so, they said great things about it. I'd like to throw my name in the hat. Or, for some jobs, some information interviews, I wasn't even thinking of applying. I just generally wanted to find out about it. And he was like, hey, we're hiring at the moment, so would you mind passing me on your resume, and I'll pass it on that way. So I really think it's a really good and easy way to get a foot in the door with companies, not only for job applications, but finding out a lot about the job role itself. And I ended up getting my job through a friend of a friend who knew someone. So, unfortunately for people, I feel it is very who you know. I know, again, like quite cliched, but and the best way of doing that is getting out there, getting informational interviews. If you have any friends in industry, linking them up with someone, because I think companies want to get good people in, and if they get any kind of recommendation saying, hey, this is a good person, I think they'd be much more keen than someone coming in blind and just kind of trying to figure it out off a resume or something. So I really think information interviews are an incredible way to do it, and people are very receptive to it, of what I found.
Wonderful. Could you tell us what your interview looks like? How many interviews did you have for your current position? Sorry,
Go ahead.
was that just informal discussions, or did you have to prepare a presentation?
Their presentation. Yeah. And that was actually quite difficult because we're in the liver transplant space. So a very brief blurb, I probably should have mentioned this at the start, but we take livers that are discarded for transplant, no longer viable, and we keep them alive on a perfusion machine for a week and test out different therapies on those. So it was, and I've used to working in mostly rodent models of liver disease. So it was very different. So it was a lot of cramming of completely switching tracks. The liver physiology stayed the same, but in terms of the application and kind of more translational clinical aspect, I kind of had to get up to speed with that quite a bit. So prepped like PowerPoint slides. Doing my stuff was fine, because you're used to presenting your data all the time, but kind of anticipating what they might like for projects and stuff that you really thought, okay, I think this will work. And you're like, a lot of it was, to be honest, I was like, I hope this will work. But ended up landing, they end up being like, this is kind of the exactly kind of stuff we want. And what was very important for them was meeting the rest of the team, because it was we're only a team of 5 here in New York at the moment. So obviously with such a small team, interpersonal relationships and dynamics are really important. So they really want to make sure you get on with everyone, went for coffee with individual people. And after that, I got offered it after that. So because it was they needed to get things rapidly done. I wonder in a bigger company or more established, is it a bit more long drawn out process? I'm not sure, but it was quite quick for me. And then I told my PI at the time that I was looking, but I said, it'd probably be like 6 to 8 months before I'm anywhere. And then it was 2 months later, I was like, look, I got this. Kind of similar to the last talk as well. So I think being open in that, let them know when you're looking and give a timeline if you can. But with the job search and getting offers, there's really no set time, because you're not going to pass. You're not going to pass up an opportunity being like, oh, I told my PI I was going to wait another 6 months. So just being open and honest in that process, I think is very helpful, and just kind of de-stresses the situation for a lot of people.
Yeah, so that's a similar theme that we've heard already. I'm going to shift. Dr. Lane, would you like to speak about what the process was like when you interviewed at Ferring?
Yes, so I actually have a lot of things that are going to reflect on exactly what Rory was just talking about as well. So I also would like to stress the value of informational interviews, and I can say from my experience that it was extremely helpful for me. I have wanted to work at Ferring for a very long time, so I actually have a really embarrassing selfie with like the Ferring sign when I was in San Diego on a trip one time in like 2015 or something, where I was like, I want to work here one day. And which I don't think anyone at Ferring knows about. But anyways, so I've had my eye on Ferring for a long time. And so when I was about 1.5 years into postdoc, and I started thinking, I don't really want to be here forever, and I want to see, what Ferring has available. And so I applied for a scientist position that was open, and didn't hear anything, had started telling a couple of my coworkers at my postdoc, I think I'm interested in this position. And someone said, oh, you should reach out to this scientist there that I met through I forgot what it was, but it was extremely random way that they had met. And so I said, okay, thanks. So I reached out on LinkedIn and I said, I know this person, and they said I should reach out to you. And so I had this informational interview. And so, but when this woman sent me an invitation for this, brief meeting, she called it pre-interview with Sydney Lane for Scientist 1 position. And so I hadn't even mentioned the position. So she immediately was assuming like I was interested. And so I said, okay, this is a little bit more serious than I was thinking, and I'm just going to make sure I'm really well prepared. So that meeting was really, really important, I think, for me to, I think soon after that, they set up a first interview, and that was just with the hiring manager, just to ask me what my interest was in the company, what was my background, kind of just screen me. I think that was about half an hour phone call. And then I got a message probably 2 weeks later. So I'm, wondering for 2 weeks. And then I get a message about another sort of pre-interview, which was a Zoom call with a few people in the company, with a few scientists, to kind of get another gauge on what my interests were in my background. And then they set up a formal interview, which was an 8-hour all on Zoom. They would have usually sent me out, but it was in summer of 2021, and so they did it all over Zoom, and they said prepare an hour talk, and then you'll have half-hour meetings the rest of the day. They didn't say really what, so I essentially framed all of my past research experiences as, here are different opportunities in the women's health lifespan where you could opportunities, basically gaps in women's health, and opportunities for intervention and treatment. And so I tried to frame it in a way that would be interesting to them in like a drug discovery perspective, and talked through all of my past projects, and made it clear where I had published, and kind of was able to give sort of a talk about my background, along with showing sort of my scientific knowledge. And then each meeting the rest of the day was very different from the rest. I think, there were some that were clearly just trying to gauge me as a person and see whether I might fit in with the team. And then there were certain meetings that were very science heavy and asking me very, very specific questions about different pathways and making sure I could speak to the science of what I was presenting. And I think a point that I really wanted to make about the informational interviewing was, because I'd had that initial meeting with the scientist, I understood the position really well and exactly kind of what would be expected and what skills and, on my end and background and knowledge that I could bring to the table that was seen as beneficial or valuable to the team. And so I think there have been people that I've interviewed that had a lot of questions, but they were too basic, I think, or too, they weren't well versed enough in what the position was. And sometimes that shows through. So I think that the informational interviews can be really helpful in figuring out okay, what am I interviewing for exactly? And sometimes, you still have more questions, or I still didn't fully understand what drug discovery was. Like I said, I'm still sort of learning, but kind of to know what the position is, and you'd be surprised, but sometimes you realize that the person interviewing really doesn't even know. They might be a good candidate, but they end up seeming a little naive or something because they don't actually know what they're applying for. So I think having a lot of questions, having the right questions is important, but having a lot of questions for your interviewers, I think was one of the best things that, I think helped for me. And then I think maybe a couple weeks later is when I heard, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, I heard that they wanted to set up a 30-minute phone call with HR. And then that's when they gave me the offer verbally. So.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I think if I can summarize, do your homework and know exactly what the position is going to entail as best your ability. And then you mentioned having questions prepared. So maybe we can circle back to that. But in the meantime, Sade, would you like to go ahead and give your perspective? I expect it'll be slightly different given that you're in a different position. So I'm interested to hear.
Yeah, definitely. So my current role, I guess just starting off with how the interview process went. This is going to sound crazy, but I did about 7-8 rounds of interviews. And these were like 1 hour long interview calls with essentially our entire executive leadership team. So really started off my conversations with the recruiter, which is like an hour-long call, just to talk about, typical salary related questions, equity related questions, and then started off with our chief behavioral officer, 1 hour conversation, had one hour conversations with our chief technology officer, our senior director of data analytics, our chief AI scientist, and then specifically on the current team I work with at the time, also met with our director of behavioral design and our director of research operations. So it was an extensive interview process, but surprisingly enough, it was very informal. It was just very informal conversations where I was just asked essentially, I came from the industry space already, having done 3 years at another startup called Amada Health. So I was kind of in a unique position where it was very different from my first round of interviewing. So I was really asked just like high level strategy, thought leadership questions. They were really interested in just really learning like what kind of research I've done, hard decisions I've had to make in being in a research position. There really wasn't a lot of focus on just like scientific skills, because I think just my background and experience kind of already showcased that. So it's really just like everything about like leadership, thought leadership, really trying to gauge like, have I had experience building out a roadmap, types of studies I've conducted. And just a point on, I think Rory and Sydney both made this point, so also want to harp on just the importance of informational interviews, but not only that, but just connecting and networking with people who are in the industry space. Currently for my role, I don't think if I didn't value networking and connecting with folks, I would be in this space, because surprisingly enough, it's not even a role I applied to. It just came about within my network, and someone helped me make the connection with my current boss. So really just want to harp on the importance of just informational interviews, but also just like getting in this natural, I guess, habit of just connecting with folks, whether it's on LinkedIn and just sending a message to folks who are also in your space, because I think a lot of these opportunities come up at times where you least expect it, especially in my case. I wouldn't say I was necessarily looking. I think something came my way and it just happened to check all the boxes, and really just making connections with folks who are in my space, I think really played a big role in that. And yeah, I would say in terms of just interviewing and questions that you get asked, I think it's also important just to do your research on the company, and just really get familiar with the company you're interviewing, because I think it helps you come equipped with very specific questions that you could ask. And I think it also showcases a level of interest and a level of just understanding to who you're interviewing with. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'll just plug that we do have a session on the networking and applying this afternoon. So we're hearing it reiterated from most of our panel that is very important. And so we've dedicated some time to that. In the meantime, we have several questions coming into the chat. And so Dr. Huberty, I would love to direct a couple of them towards you. We're getting asked, what types of questions might I get asked? So if you could speak to that, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, so I think one of the things here is that when you're a scientist and you want to work in industry, you have to be able to show that you can wear both hats, that you understand what it means to be a good scientist, that you care about outcomes, and that you can communicate the information, but also that you understand the business. And at the end of the day, the business has to make money, number one, and basically they need to generate revenue. So science has to support revenue generation. A publication can do that, but there's a lot of other things that can too. So when you're interviewing, you want to make sure that you can show that you can do these things. So like, I was looking through some of the questions that some of the people were asking, and it's like, the first question you get is like, tell me something about yourself. Like, I always ask that question, not related to work. I don't want to know anything about them related to work. I already see on your CV, your resume, I understand that, but can you tell me something about yourself? And interestingly enough, that stumps most people, because they haven't really thought about who they are as a person and those kinds of things in terms of an answer, right? Because you think about your answers beforehand and all those things. So really thinking about who you are, like what do you want to share about yourself that's not related to work? Like, that's an important thing. People are trying to get to know your personality, your likes, your interests, those kinds of things. So I would say really be thoughtful about that. And if you choose to answer a question, tell me about yourself with more professional answer, then make sure you put something in there related to your personal self. I would say, again, we're living in a Zoom world. We're not doing things in person anymore. It's one way for people to get to know a little bit about you. I think other questions, what I'm trying to get at when I'm interviewing is, did you do your due diligence with the company? Do you really know about this company? Do you really know what they're trying to do? Do you really understand and do you care? So I can't tell you, like 9 times out of 10, when I ask questions about their research experience or whatever, and how they're going to take that research experience and apply it, the answer is never really directly answered, or the question is never really directly answered. And a lot of times I see, and this is at PhD and postdoc, like the homework hasn't been done on getting to know the company. They might have read the mission statement, but like, let's say it's an app. Did you use the app? Did you go and experience it? Did you try to, tap into, like, even before a paywall to kind of see what's going on? Like, what have you done for your due diligence? And I know this isn't in every single case that you can do that, but in any way, shape, or form that you can get to know the company, the services, the product, the content, whatever it is, you should be doing that before your interview, whether it's a call, it's like 15 minutes to check in, or if it's an actual interview. When I do interviews for all companies and at COM, there were 3 or 4 stages. The first one is, I just want to talk to you for 5 to 10 minutes on the phone. I want to know that it's a fit for you and a fit for me right off the bat, so I don't waste your time and I don't waste the company's time in terms of engaging longer. So, really quickly, I'll just ask, like, why do you want this job? And like, what's exciting you? So you should already know that. And right away, I can tell if this person hasn't done their homework. I'm not talking to them. I'm not going to wait for you to do your homework until your interview officially, right? The next phase I like to do is a take-home interview where you're given something to do. And this is just because in my role, I need strong writers. It doesn't matter if you're writing a paper, a grant, a blog, something for the website, you should be able to write. And so there'll be examples of writing. So sharpening up on your writing skills. Do you know what an Ames page is? Can you write an Ames page pretty strongly? Like, that's the strongest your writing needs to be. Have you written a blog? Have you written, emails to partners or all those things? Like, make sure you've sharpened those skills in case that, that's just what I've done and what the companies I work with do, because again, I can weed out people who can and can't write, because as a scientist, you have to be able to write. And then the final is the actual interview, where you interview with so that at that point, I would involve the CEO. Up until that point, nobody's involved except me and maybe some research coordinators or other scientists who I'm working with or partnering with, or maybe a scientific advisory board member or something like that. But I don't involve the CEOs until we're at the very end. And it's like, okay, we're really thinking about this person. And this is your chance to shine or not shine. But this is your chance. I think someone asked like how to tailor an academic talk for an industry audience. So first I will say, don't tailor an academic talk for an industry audience. Write the talk for industry. Don't modify. It's obvious when you modify. I'm sorry, but it is. So if I'm sitting in an interview talk and I feel like I'm at SBM, Society of Behavioral Medicine, we have problems, right? Because I can read the paper, the CEO does not care, they're bored, they're falling asleep. I had 2 weeks ago, I had some scientists apply for a job, okay? A behavioral research scientist job. I had a very young girl, straight out of the gate, no postdoc. And then I had 2 more experienced scientists, like, further down the road, had postdocs. And me, I really, there was something about the younger scientist that I was really like, oh, I think she's going to be good, but I couldn't really tell. And I didn't want to say anything, but, I was figuring the 2 that were further along would do a lot better and have a lot more to say. And the CEO is going to want one of them, which was fine either way. But it was the interview at the end where that young girl killed it. She did so well. So she took her presentation and she wrote it for industry. The other 2 took a presentation and wrote it for scientists, or they took an older presentation and they basically, so the ask is, talk about your research. What is your expertise? What can you do? What do you bring to the table? And then apply it, to us. Like, how are you gonna, launch science at this company? And so this one young lady, she really did that. She talked about all her strengths and the things she's really good at. She gave us some context with what she had done in research, but she didn't ever go through, these were my methods, these were my results, these are my conclusions. Nobody cares, we'll read the paper. Like, she really literally said, like, I am quantitatively skilled in this study. I did these kinds of, and then she said, like, this is how I can help your company, right? Like, so it was so well thought out. She killed it. I was so proud of her just because she was young, no postdoc, and I had no postdoc. Like, I was totally rooting for the rookie, but I just like it was great. She did such a good job. So I'm saying the science is important. You have to be able to show that you understand science and you're a good scientist, and you want to mention how many publications or how many grants you've had or all those things, but they only care how it's going to apply to them. They don't care how it applies to science. You're going to teach them how it's going to apply to science, how what they're doing is going to build science and how they're contributing to science. That's your job, to educate them. CEOs don't really, they want to build their company. So, and then there was one other question. Someone said, coming from an extensive industry background before starting my PhD, can I reasonably expect more questions regarding my previous work experience or academic research? And it's kind of the same thing. Show your academic, notches, and then how you're going to apply those things. And one thing I'll just say, this is like a side tidbit mentoring thing, is like a lot of scientists who go into industry, like publications, unfortunately with the companies aren't, or it depends on a role, right? It depends on your role. If you're doing like behavioral science for product, you might not have as many opportunities to write papers as you would in different situations. But I would say whatever abilities you have to continue to write papers, you should take the time and do that. If it's working with colleagues on things outside of the company or whatever, because when you go to change your job, the lifespan of a scientist in industry is very different than in academia. In academia, we just post up and retire, right? Like, you don't really move a lot. It's actually, in the past, it hasn't been, celebrated, but in industry, you might be 3 to 5 years and then you're on to something else, or 2 to 4 or whatever. And so the science, your ability to publish is still important. That still gives you some clout when you go to apply for new jobs. They do care, because it's like your name. Like, I'm hiring this scientist, that has these accolades. And even though they might not directly apply to that company, they're hiring a scientist with accolades. They want to use you for media. They want to use you for press. They want to put your picture up in your bio on their website. So in order to stay strong on the science side, you have to have some publications. So that's like a little side note. Anyway, I don't know. Are there other, like, anything else that I can offer from a perspective of like interviewing a lot of people? for a lot of
Yeah,
companies.
I think you mentioned that first question that you always ask, tell me about yourself. What are some other key questions that our trainees will get across multiple different positions in industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other panelists too can share maybe questions they were
Yeah,
asked.
please.
Like, yeah, but like, I do ask about how they're organized, how they work, how they stay organized, how they like to work in teams, how, their ability to solve problems and work alone, especially in remote situations. Like if you're doing something and you're all by yourself, like, how are you going to handle that? So, solving problems, coming up with solutions. I do ask about NIH experience. I do ask about enjoyment of writing, because a lot of times scientists will just be honest, which is good. Like, I'm not that excited about writing. So that, to me, for me and who I'm hiring for, I would never hire someone who isn't interested in writing, because writing is an important part of science, but it's okay. There's other jobs where writing isn't as important. So it's just in my areas that I'm working. So I do ask about that and NIH experience, like even just understanding aims and research for design, like designing research studies and their experience with that, quantitative expertise, any software that is typically used in companies versus in, like we use R and Stata or whatever, but like, do you have any experience with like quick sites or like Typeform, I think it's, or Jotform, or those kinds of things that companies use instead of Qualtrics and RedCap. And it's okay if you don't, but at least, knowing what those are is a good thing, right? Or being able to say, because a lot of times a quantitative person will say, I don't, but I know I can learn it. And this is how I know. Right. So that's a good answer, right? Because we're not always expecting you to know it. You're going to be trained on it. But if you can show that, like, hey, I know I can do this, because that's very helpful.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists want to weigh in with specific questions, maybe one that stumped you, or your favorite question to ask in interviews?
I have one comment sort of to piggyback off of what you were just saying was that I was thinking about earlier, in academia versus industry, they can kind of trick you with the question of, are you an independent worker? How do you feel about working independently? And I think coming from a postdoc, for example, where I'm managing my own project and I have to be a self-starter and I have to push my own project forward or it just goes nowhere. And, no one's really managing me exactly. You do have to be independent, and that's a strength. But I think in industry, you have to be a collaborator, and that is way more important than being an independent employee. I think that's something that, I can work independently. I am a self-starter, I am self-motivated, but more importantly, I can collaborate and I can work in cross-functional teams and I can be a communicator. And I think, that's just kind of a difference, I think, when you're coming into industry, something to think about. Like I said, it's, I'm in sort of a reproductive medicine group that has subject matter expertise, but there are just so many functional groups across the board that I talk with every single day. And so, a lot of it's delegating, a lot of it's, sharing ideas and being open to new ideas, and, sometimes being open to a project that you've worked on for months and all of a sudden it's someone else's project and you're not supposed to think about it anymore. So independence is good, but more importantly, being part of a team, I think in industry, it becomes more important.
I'll add one thing, and I think some of you brought this up already. I think Sydney definitely did. And I think Rory did as well. Like reaching out to people and because if a job is open and they have 50 applicants, how do you stand out on paper, right? Because there's a lot of people that want to work in industry now. And, I would say that LinkedIn is super powerful, and that reaching out on LinkedIn is a good idea. Like every time I have an ad out for a company or whatever, I post to LinkedIn. And I will get people, I get a lot of people who message me on LinkedIn and they've already turned in their application. But I really appreciate it, to be honest. Yes, I get a lot, but I appreciate it because you're telling me you're a go-getter. You're telling me you're not just going to put it in and wait. You're like, I'm going to put it in, but I'm also going to tell you I put it in, and I'm going to hope that, knowing you could never hear from me, right? Because a lot of us, even myself, all LinkedIn people, and they never respond. So the fact that you had the gumption to do that, and also you were a go-getter enough to do that, like those people stand out to me, or they find my email and they send me an email. It's like, good for you. You went above and beyond. And so of course I'm going to go straight to your application and look at it. It doesn't mean you're going to be, like able to do the position always, but who knows, it could be something else I'm hiring for, right? So I really appreciate that. So I encourage that. I think that's smart moves. And people say they're bothered. Never bothers me. I try to get back to everybody, but I would say definitely do that. And when you do LinkedIn them, I would say, if you can, attach your one-page resume so they don't have to go back to their software and find your resume. It's right there. And they can know right away if they're interested in you, or give them the lowdown if you can't attach anything.
Thank you so much. And we can get to Sade and Dr. Cunningham as well, but I also wanted to bring up one of the questions in the chat is saying, how should you go about answering the question of what are your salary expectations? And particularly if they already have posted a salary range, what are they looking for when they ask this question?
I can tell you, they're making sure you're in the salary range, because that's the range, that's the budget. And if you want more than what's in the budget, then that's the end of the conversation. At least every single company that I worked with has been that way. We know what their range is, and that's it. Because it's, especially if it's investor money, you only have so much money. So you have to stick to your budgets. And I would say that is like kind of a loaded question and can be scary if you don't have the range, right? But I would say just be thoughtful, ask others who have been hired recently, if they want to share around the range they were hired for. 2 years ago, in my experience, it was higher than what it is now. I'll say that one thing. And the second thing is that just because it's a digital or just because it's a industry doesn't mean they have tons of money. I think that's a misconception, is that, oh, well, we're not in academics, so they should pay me a lot more money. And the salaries are definitely higher, 100%, but they're not like 2 times, right? Like, so be mindful of that. I had someone talk to me last week about a position as a research scientist, and they wanted $200,000 a year, as like they've been in industry like 2 years. It's not happening. At least not one single company that I've been working with, a behavioral research scientist. So like I stopped the conversation with her. Sadly, she was super experienced, but like, what are we going to do with that? It's not the going rate these days. So I just be mindful about what the going rate is, and talk to your friends, talk to your mentors about what they recommend.
Yeah, I want to echo that with what Jen said about it. Gives you so much more confidence going into an interview. Like if you're negotiating salary, knowing a ballpark figure of what that kind of position is. I know like Glassdoor is very helpful for looking at ranges of salaries for certain positions, reaching out to friends in companies with similar positions, going in with some kind of ballpark figure, because we're coming from in academia, maybe you talk for another day, but you're coming from such a fairly low salary, so anything seems great, anything above it seems great, but knowing a ballpark figure, knowing the kind of range that similar position is based on the city and based on whether it's a startup or not as well, obviously factors into it, but it gives you more confidence going in, kind of like, okay, here's the kind of ballpark I'm looking for.
And don't forget that health insurance and equity in some cases, mean something too. So sometimes, you could be willing to go lower on salary because you're getting a little equity or you're getting awesome health insurance. Because some of these healthcare companies, startups, they have amazing insurance.
Yeah, I just
Shad-
wanted
Oh, great. I just was gonna go to you, so please.
all good. No, and I just wanted to add, I realized early in just being in the industry space when it comes to specifically anything around salary that it's like you could go on Glassdoor and whatnot, but really in the startup space, it's really hard to kind of find something out there as a benchmark. So I really rely on just people within my network. And there's just even mentors that I have where I could just have transparent conversations around just like, this is what they're offering me. When you were in this position, does this sound about right? And even just relying on people just in terms of just how do you even have that conversation of when you do get an offer and you want to negotiate, how do you do that? And I think Dr. Huberty mentioned this, but things are negotiable, especially around salary and equity. Or let me say it this way. If you are somebody who wants to heart more or having your salary is more important and not having as much equity is important, there, you could balance those two things is really what I'm trying to say. So always keep that in mind that especially in the startup space, it's not just your salary and that number you're getting, but it's also whatever number of options or shares that you're getting. And I learned very early on that's also negotiable. So yeah, when it comes to salary, it's hard to find a benchmark out there. Really rely on your internal network. You have mentors who are in the industry space where you could just have a transparent conversation and really get insight into like what you should be expecting in terms of a salary or what you should be asking for or how to negotiate. Really rely on those people.
And I can share my experience as well. I, knowing sort of that I had this 30-minute phone call with HR and that probably, you know, salary would be negotiated or would be discussed if they were giving me an offer. I looked on Glassdoor, and that's my company is actually privately owned, and it's not big pharma. We like to call it medium pharma, I suppose. So it's a little bit different than some like the startup world, I think. We have about 7,000 employees globally, but so for me, I was able to, again, look in my city. So look in San Diego specifically for my company, because I'm sure California salaries might be different than, you know, Kansas salaries or things like that, just because of cost of living. And so I had an idea, and the HR manager said, okay, you know, I'm not sure if we can get there, but we can get close to that. And, you know, I said, okay. And so then when they came back with the offer, and then it included, you know, a really, really generous like relocation package, and the bonus was higher than I expected, you know, so these various things. And they did meet the number that I had said. And I thought, wow, this is awesome. Okay, great. I accept, you know. Turns out I should have negotiated for more, because I've spoken with a couple of scientist ones that started around when I did, and they're about 10 or 15% higher than I am salary wise, and have the same relocation packages, same bonus, et cetera. So I would say always shoot a little bit higher. Like, I mean, it's kind of that, I think it's a little bit tricky. You never want to come in with, you know, I want 200 grand, you know, but if that's not where you're, no, it should be. But I think if there is a range, like in your head, shoot for the top of the range, and then, you know, they can always come down a little. But I don't know, I think I sold myself short a little bit. So that's kind of a, you know, something to think about as well.
Perhaps again, this is where having that solid network really can
Mhm.
help you know where. So we are just coming up on time. So I wanted to give each of you a chance to just give one last piece of advice, or maybe your take-home summary from everything. Anything you'd like to say, I'd like to give you the opportunity to do that. We can go down yep, Sade, go for it.
No, one thing I wanted to touch on is just, I learned this early on, and I actually got this advice from my old boss at my old company, was being in academia, you're used to having a CV. Take the time, if you know you're currently in the academia space and you want to move over to industry, take the time to take your CV and turn it into a resume. I know that sounds so obvious, or not so obvious, but or may not feel as important, but it is. Trust me, especially in the industry space. Yes, you could be a seasoned researcher, but once somebody sees your resume or sees your CV, they don't need to know about all these other, appointments that you have, all these other organizations you're a part of. Find a way to condense all that and put in a resume. And really, I guess, set yourself up in a space where you have a CV, but you also have a resume. I've learned that early on that goes a long way. I have some people where they just want to see my resume and I easily have that available and can dish that out or send that out. Or people are specifically asking for a CV. So I know I have that on hand and could pass that out as well. So just, I guess, a piece of advice, if you're somebody looking to go into the industry space, I think it's very important that you are walking around with a CV and a resume.
Thank you. Yes, and I'll just plug, for those of you that weren't able to join us this morning, we had a great session from Dr. Betts on taking your academic CV and getting it to what industry folks are looking for in a resume. Dr. Huberty, you unmuted. Would you?
I was just going to add to what she said, because one thing that I do and I like when others do, which I haven't seen it that often, but at the end of the resume, because we're scientists and we usually have publications, just put your link to your, the like at NIH or the my bibliography or whatever it is that you have to update on BioSketches, throw that link at the bottom, because that's huge. Because then I have a 1-page resume, so I can see really quick what you've got going. And then if I want to see what you've published, I don't have to ask for a CV. I can just click on that link and see it live. So I would say that's like a way to combine both, but I agree 100% to spend the time or the money on getting someone to put your resume together. That's really good advice.
Any final thoughts from the remaining panelists?
Yeah, I thought final thoughts would be kind of echoing what was kind of mentioned throughout the whole day, as well as the networking stuff. When I was in my PhD, they were like, you got to network. And I was like, what even is networking? Is it just going to talk to people at conferences? Like, that's all I kind of knew it was, but you can do it from your couch at home. Reach out to people on LinkedIn, send a 2-sentence email saying, hey, it came across your job title, it looks really interesting. Do you have 10 minutes to talk about it? It really is that simple. It's not daunting at all. It's very low hanging fruit, and it really is a great way for like a post interview follow up, like Jen said, or pre-interview, just kind of get a feel for the company and the role. That would be my final advice, I guess.
Thank you.
And I would mirror that as well and just say, people can learn a lot about you based on questions you're asking them. So if you ask them questions for 20 minutes and want to learn more about them and kind of relate to them a little bit as they're giving you information about themselves, then that's a really natural way for you to kind of say, this is who I am and this is where I'm coming from. And so it doesn't have to be, anything scary, but just showing that you can communicate and showing that you're interested is the biggest thing.
Thank you all so much. I think my biggest take homes from this session is networking, which we'll hear more about this afternoon, and doing your homework on the specific company before you have any meetings with anyone. So thank you all so very much for your time. We really, really appreciate it. I'm sure we could stay here all day asking questions, but if everyone would please thank our speakers with me. That was excellent. In terms of our presentation, we are going to on a lunch break. So we'll have an hour lunch break, and then we'll come back with a different set of panelists. So thank you all so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Becca.
Thanks, guys. It was great to meet the panel as well. Good to meet you guys.
Bye.
Yeah.
Take care.
Same.
Bye.
Bye.